Some men order a bride out of loneliness. Thomas Hale ordered one because silence was eating him alive. He didn't need a woman to cook or clean. He needed one who wouldn't ask questions about the war, the scars on his back, or why he flinched when someone shut a door too hard. He had built a quiet life in the cold spine of the Montana Territory, where the wind howled like a ghost every night, and even the wolves kept their distance. But something inside him cracked that winter. Something deep. So he wrote a letter, just one, folded it with trembling hands and sent it to a matchmaker in Kansas. "I got land, I got work, but I ain't got much heart left. If she can live with that, tell her to come." That was 5 months ago. Now he stood at Ember Ridge Station, boots planted on frozen wood, watching a black locomotive scream across the horizon like it was bringing the past straight to his doorstep. The townsfolk paid no mind. Ember Ridge had seen its fair share of mail-order brides, another woman stepping off the train, another lonely man praying she didn't turn right around. But Thomas wasn't just nervous. He felt like a noose was tightening around his ribs. Then, the train hissed to a stop. He saw her. She stepped down in a pale blue coat, holding something wrapped in wool against her chest. Her face was delicate, not soft, more like something chipped out of porcelain and barely glued back together. Her eyes scanned the platform, unsure, until they landed on him. In that instant, the wind stopped. Her mouth fell open. The wool bundle in her arms stirred. A baby. A baby? Thomas blinked, unsure if his eyes had tricked him. She didn't wave, didn't speak. She stared, like she knew him, like she'd seen his face somewhere she never wanted to be again. And then, her hands let go. The baby slipped from her grasp like she forgot it was even there. It landed gently in the snow, blanketed tight, beginning to cry. She didn't look down. She turned, bolted, and vanished around the far end of the station, her coat flaring like wings behind her. Thomas couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Couldn't explain why this stranger had looked at him like he was the devil himself. The baby wailed at his feet, and Thomas Hale stood alone again, this time not just haunted by his past, but by the terrifying thought that it had come back wearing pale blue. Subscribe now so you don't miss the truth that could burn the whole town to the ground. The child's cries pierced through the frosted silence like a church bell tolling for the dead. Thomas Hale dropped to one knee, his heart hammering as he scooped the small bundle into his arms. The baby, no older than a few months, was warm, pink-cheeked, and furious about the cold. The wool blanket smelled faintly of lavender. And something else, something old. A memory, maybe. The woman was gone, just gone, a swirl of snow where she'd run. No explanation, no apology, just a ghost of pale blue in the wind. Thomas looked around. No one moved to help. The station master lit a cigar. A pair of cowhands glanced over with bored eyes. In Ember Ridge, everyone had secrets. No one asked questions they weren't ready to answer. He held the baby closer, trying to calm it, but the child screamed louder. Thomas wasn't a father, never had been. He didn't even know how to hold a child right. His arms felt too stiff, too dangerous. Like his body still didn't know how to be trusted with something fragile. He walked slowly back toward his wagon, boots crunching over frost. His mind raced. Why didn't she tell me about the baby? And why did she look at me like that? That wasn't fear. It was recognition. Raw, stunned recognition. He sat in the wagon and cradled the child in the crook of his arm, trying to remember everything she'd written in her letters, Evelyn Grace. From Lawrence, Kansas, 27, no family, no children. She'd said her fiancé died in the war. She said she'd known grief, but never once had she mentioned a child. Thomas stared out toward the path she'd taken, jaw clenched so tight it ached. His breath clouded the air. The baby whimpered now, softer, like even it knew something had gone terribly wrong. He loosened the blanket a little to check for injuries, but something in the folds caught his eye. A locket, tied around the baby's neck with a thin, faded ribbon. He carefully opened it. Inside was a sketch, crude but unmistakable, a woman and him, drawn in ink as if from memory, his own jawline, his scarred cheek, the long, tired eyes. He felt the air go thin. Thomas Hale had never seen that locket before in his life, but someone had drawn him inside it, and that woman, Evelyn, had looked into his eyes like she'd stared at that drawing 1,000 nights, in fear. His hand began to tremble. The baby, this child, was connected to something he couldn't remember. Or maybe something he had forced himself to forget. Was this her child, or was it his? Thomas Hale sat motionless in the driver's seat of his wagon, holding a child who shouldn't have existed, and a locket that whispered of a past he had no. Memory of snowflakes drifted lazily down from the gray Montana sky, catching in his hair and eyelashes, melting on the baby's warm blanket. The child had fallen asleep against his chest now, tiny fingers curled against the coarse wool of Thomas's coat, breathing in rhythm with his heartbeat. A strange comfort bloomed in his chest, unfamiliar and dangerous. He kept staring at the sketch in the locket. The lines weren't masterful, but they were careful. The artist had studied his face, not just drawn it, memorized it. The high brow, the tired slope of his shoulders, even the way one side of his mouth dipped lower than the other. It was him, but not the man in the mirror today. The drawing was younger, unscarred, with softer eyes and a quiet kind of hope in them. Thomas couldn't remember the last time he looked that way. He closed the locket and tucked it back into the blanket, careful not to wake the child. His thoughts spiraled, crashing against every wall in his mind. Had he known Evelyn before the war? Before the drinking, the wandering, the years he lost in shadows? He thought of her eyes at the station, the way she froze, the way she ran. That wasn't confusion. It was recognition and terror. He snapped the reins gently and urged the horses forward. The wagon creaked through the slush, wheels dragging, like they, too, resisted moving forward. As they climbed the hill toward his ranch, the snowfall thickened. The sky darkened. Up ahead, smoke curled from his chimney, steady, welcoming, but home had never felt more foreign. Inside, the cabin was warm. Firelight danced across stone and old pine. He laid the baby down in the softest place he could find, a folded quilt atop a cedar chest near the hearth. The child stirred but didn't cry. Thomas stood over him and let the silence press in. He'd fought men in trenches and survived winter nights colder than death. But nothing ever felt this heavy, this unknown. He moved to the shelf, pulled down a worn tin box that hadn't been opened in years. Inside, pieces of the man he used to be, army pins, a letter from his mother he never finished reading, and folded deep beneath the clutter, an old photograph. Him, with a girl beside him. She had dark curls, a narrow face, eyes that were always squinting against the sun. He didn't remember her name. He didn't remember the moment, but there she was, holding his hand, smiling like she belonged to him. His throat tightened. He leaned against the table and exhaled. Slow and shallow. Something was breaking loose in his memory like thawed ice snapping free from the mountains. Then, 3 sharp knocks. The front door. Not wind. Not imagination. A fist. Thomas turned slowly. His hand hovered near the rifle by the mantel. Another knock, this time slower. He stepped forward, heart pounding. He opened the door, and Evelyn stood there, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, with blood on her sleeve. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him, as if the wind had torn away everything she'd been hiding, and now there was no turning back. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her coat soaked through, lips trembling, and that smear of red staining her sleeve like a wound that hadn't healed. Thomas didn't move. Neither did she. The baby stirred on the quilt by the fire, letting out a soft, mewling cry, almost as if it sensed her presence. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the sound, and for a breathless second, her composure cracked. Her jaw trembled. Her hands clenched. Thomas stepped aside. She walked in without a word. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing out the snowstorm. The wind moaned across the cabin walls like a ghost being kept out. Evelyn's eyes locked on the child, who was now blinking up at the flickering fire. She dropped to her knees beside him, one hand hovering, afraid to touch, too ashamed not to. "I wasn't going to leave him," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, ragged, like someone who hadn't used it in days. I panicked. "I thought you'd recognize me. I thought you'd send me back." Thomas leaned against the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. "I don't even know your real name," he said quietly. She nodded slowly, brushing a lock of wet hair from her eyes. "It's Evelyn Grace still. That part's true. But I wasn't born in Kansas. I was born in Mississippi. And the baby's name is Caleb." She looked up at him, eyes swimming with something between fear and longing. "He's yours, Thomas." He didn't flinch. Not visibly, but something inside him tilted sideways. "Explain," he said, his voice cold but steady. "All of it." Evelyn sat back against the hearth, trembling from more than just the cold. 3 years ago, you came through a town called Hollow Creek. You were drinking, half dead from fever. You didn't remember much, and I didn't tell you who I was. I was working in the back of a tavern, cleaning floors. You saved me from a man who thought I belonged to him. Thomas's breath caught. She nodded, eyes down. You stayed one night, that's all. You never asked for anything. But you looked at me like I mattered. It was the first time I ever felt seen. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper, a birth record. She handed it to him with shaking fingers. I wrote you letters, she whispered, every month for a year, but I never knew where to send them. You never stayed anywhere long enough. Thomas opened the paper, hands stiff. The name, Caleb James Hale. Mother, Evelyn Grace. Father, unknown. I thought I'd raise him alone, she said. But it got bad. Men came looking for me, said I'd stolen from someone powerful. I had to run. I sold everything to come here, to find you. And when I saw your face at the station, she swallowed hard. I didn't think you'd want either of us. The silence that followed was long and thick, heavy like snow-laden branches waiting to snap. Thomas looked at the baby, then at Evelyn. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a ghost walking through someone else's life. He felt anchored, needed. Why is there blood on your sleeve? He asked finally. Her eyes widened. They followed me, she whispered. They know I came here. Thomas straightened, the rifle already in his hand. Outside, the wind howled, but beneath it came the crunch of boots in snow. They weren't alone anymore. Thomas didn't waste time asking more questions. His hands moved with quiet precision. Rifle checked, loaded, hammer back. Evelyn stood frozen near the hearth, her breath visible in the air despite the fire. Outside, the sound came again. Slow, deliberate steps crunching through snow, circling the cabin like wolves scenting blood. How many? Thomas asked. 2. Maybe 3, Evelyn whispered. The big one, Jonah Cray. He's the one who's... After me, Thomas's eyes flicked to the window. Nothing but white, but he knew better. Men like Cray didn't come in loud unless they wanted you nervous. He could feel it now, eyes watching from the trees. He moved across the room and blew out the lantern. Shadows swallowed the cabin, leaving only the pulsing light of the fire. You know how to shoot? He asked without turning. I know how. To pray, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. Stay low. Don't go near the windows. Evelyn picked up Caleb and tucked herself into the farthest corner of the room, shielding the child with her body. Her back hit the wall. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on the door. Thomas slipped out the side entrance, stepping into the snow without a sound. The wind had died down, leaving only silence thick enough to choke on. His breath steamed from his mouth as he moved along the edge of the cabin. He stepped into his own boot prints from earlier to mask his trail, rifle ready. Then he saw it. Half a figure behind the woodpile. Coat stiff with frost, hat pulled low. Cray. Thomas raised the rifle. "I wouldn't," he said calmly. The man turned slowly, smiling. "Well, I'll be," Cray muttered. "You really are still alive." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Didn't expect to see me?" "No," Cray said. "Didn't expect Evelyn to find you first." Behind him, another figure emerged, younger, twitchier. Rifle in hand, fingers tapping nervously on the barrel. Thomas didn't lower his aim. "You're trespassing." "Don't mind trespassing when we're reclaiming what's ours," Cray said, shrugging. "The girl took something. Belongs to my brother." "What did she take?" Cray smiled wider. "That's the wrong question." A pause. "The right question is, what did she run from?" Inside the cabin, Evelyn crouched, clutching Caleb. She couldn't hear the words outside, but she felt the shift in the air, like a noose tightening. Her fingers brushed something under the quilt, a small revolver. Thomas must have left it there. She held it close. Outside, Thomas's grip tightened on the rifle. "Whatever it is," he said, "she's under my roof now. That means she's under my protection." Cray's eyes darkened. "Well then," he said, stepping forward. "That makes you part of the debt, doesn't it?" The younger man beside him suddenly raised his rifle. Thomas didn't hesitate. A single shot rang out. The younger man fell, snow exploding beneath him. Cray dove behind the woodpile, cursing, bullets flying into the dark. Thomas ducked low, rolling, toward the porch as splinters flew from the posts. Inside, Evelyn screamed and fired blindly toward the window. Glass shattered. The baby cried. And then silence. Just wind. Just firelight and blood in the snow. Smoke curled around the shattered window as silence reclaimed the cabin. Only the baby's crying broke the stillness, a soft, terrified sound that wrapped around Evelyn's heart like barbed wire. She clutched Caleb close, her breath hitching, ears ringing from the gunshot. Outside, Thomas crouched low behind the porch railing, rifle still hot in his hands. The snow around him was torn with footprints and blood, but Cray had vanished, slipped into the tree line like a wolf with a memory. Thomas's heartbeat was steady. Too steady. He'd seen this before. A man like Cray didn't come for one shot and run. No, he was circling now, looking for weakness, looking to wound first, then talk. Thomas slid back toward the door. When Evelyn opened it just enough to pull him inside, she saw it. His knuckles scraped, the look in his eyes colder than the wind behind him. "He's not gone," Thomas said. "I know," Evelyn replied softly. Thomas reloaded in silence. Then he looked at her, not the way a man looks at someone who's brought trouble to his doorstep, but like a soldier sizing up another survivor. "Tell me the real reason they're after you," he said. Evelyn didn't speak for a long moment. Then she sat down by the hearth, holding Caleb close. The fire cracked softly as she stared into it, like the flames were drawing the truth out of her. "I was married," she said at last, "to a man named Elias Cray." Thomas's jaw tightened. She didn't need to look at him to feel it. He wasn't Jonah's brother. He was his cousin. They ran freight together out of Mississippi. They moved whiskey, sometimes weapons, things they weren't supposed to. I didn't know until it was too late. When I tried to leave, he beat me near to death. Her voice cracked. I ran in the night, took nothing but a train ticket and a prayer. I found out I was carrying Caleb a month later. She looked up at Thomas now, eyes brimming. "I lied to survive, Thomas. I signed on as a mail-order bride hoping it would keep me ahead of them. I never meant to hurt you or put you in this." Thomas stared into the fire, the flames flickering in his cold eyes. The truth hit like a slow-moving storm, relentless, unstoppable. "You said he's dead?" he asked quietly. Evelyn nodded. "Shot in a raid gone wrong. Jonah blamed me, said I made Elias weak, Said I'd pay the debt he left behind. Thomas stood slowly and walked to the window, eyes scanning the tree line. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low. I've killed men for less than what they've done to you. Evelyn held Caleb tighter. I'm not asking for revenge, she said. I just want peace. Thomas turned to face her fully now. His gaze wasn't cold anymore. It was something else. Something heavier. You won't find peace in the snow, Evelyn, he said. But you might find something worth fighting for. A gust of wind slammed into the cabin, rattling what was left of the window. Then, a voice. From the trees. Thomas Hale. Jonah Cray's voice echoed through the white. You've got till sundown tomorrow to hand her over. Otherwise, we come through that door and we burn it all down. The wind took the words and scattered them across the mountains. Evelyn buried her face in Caleb's hair. Thomas didn't blink. Let them come. The night settled over the cabin like a wool blanket soaked in dread. Outside, the forest groaned under the weight of snow, branches bowing, silence pressing in like a held breath. Inside, the fire had burned low. The baby finally slept, tucked into a bundle of quilts beside Evelyn on the floor. Thomas sat across the room, cleaning his rifle by lantern light. His movements were methodical, too calm for a man with a death sentence circling him. Evelyn watched him from where she sat, her knees drawn to her chest. You've done this before, she said softly. He didn't look up. What? Waited. For men to come kill you. A pause. Yeah, he said. More than once. She hesitated. How did you survive? Thomas ran a cloth down the barrel. By making sure I had something worth surviving for. His voice was quiet, but there was a roughness to it, like a blade that had been sharpened too many times. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked at him. His jaw was tight, eyes shadowed beneath his hat, fingers marked with old scars and calluses that told stories she hadn't heard yet. A man like him didn't just drift into the wilderness for no reason. He was hiding from something, or someone. What? Was her name? She asked. He glanced up then. The question landed like a snowflake on firewood, small but enough to shift everything. Clara, he said finally. My wife. Evelyn didn't speak. She died 5 winters ago. Fever took her fast. By the time I got back from town with medicine, she was already gone. He leaned back, the rifle resting across his knees. I buried her right out there, he added, nodding toward the grove beyond the window. Next to the creek she used to love. Silence swelled between them. Not awkward, just real. I'm sorry, Evelyn said. Thomas gave a small nod. I ain't told anyone her name in years. She wrapped her shawl tighter. Then why me? He looked at her now. Really looked. Not like a stranger, not like a burden, but like someone who had already become a part of this place without meaning to. Because you remind me of her, he said simply. Evelyn blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came. A dozen things rose in her throat. Questions, apologies, maybe even tears. But none of them mattered now. Because outside, in the darkness just beyond the reach of firelight, a different kind of storm was building. Thomas stood and walked to the window, lifting the curtain slightly. He could see the faint flicker of torches deep in the trees. Not close. Not yet, but they were waiting, watching. Just like he expected, he turned back to her. They won't hit tonight, he said. Men like Cray want the sun behind them when they kill. Evelyn shivered. So what do we do? He stared at her for a long second. Then, we make them bleed for every step they take. She stood now, barefoot on the cold floor, and took a step toward him. You don't have to fight this alone, she said. He raised a brow. You offering to fight? I'm offering not to run. That changed something. Right there, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of snow and silence and death circling like vultures, something warm took root. Thomas nodded once. Then, we fight. The first hint of dawn crept across the snow like a secret too scared to be spoken aloud. Pale gold bled through the treetops, casting long shadows across the clearing. Inside the cabin, everything was still, except for the eyes that hadn't closed all night. Thomas hadn't slept. He sat by the door, rifle across his lap, eyes trained on the frost-covered horizon. Every so often, he'd shift his weight, check the windows, glance toward Evelyn and the child. But his mind was 1,000 yards away, where he knew the Cray boys waited, coiled like snakes in the brush. Evelyn stirred, pulling her shawl tighter around Caleb. The baby sighed in his sleep, unaware that the world outside was poised to shatter. She stood and moved quietly to Thomas's side, her feet making no sound on the wooden floor. "You eat anything?" she asked gently. He shook his head. She handed him a cup of coffee, thin and bitter, but warm. He took it without a word, sipped, and let the silence speak. "Why do you stay out here?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. "So far from people, from everything." He exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving the window. "Because out here a man's past don't follow him unless he invites it," he said. "And I don't do much inviting." She studied him, her gaze soft. "Do you regret it? All the silence?" Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the coffee down, adjusted the rifle, and looked at her with the kind of tired truth no preacher could ever teach. "I used to think silence was peace, but now, with you and that boy here, I think maybe I was just hiding." Her breath caught. Then, off in the distance, a bird took flight suddenly. Not natural. Spooked. Thomas stiffened. "They're moving," he whispered. He rose in one swift motion, walking to the edge of the window. He raised his spyglass, scanning the tree line. 4 men, maybe 5. They're fanning out. Coming slow. Evelyn stepped back, holding Caleb tighter. Thomas turned to her. "There's a root cellar under the floorboards. Hidden hatch behind. The stove. Take Caleb, stay quiet." She shook her head. "I told you, I'm not running." "I'm not asking," he said, more firm this time. "They don't know about it. It's the safest place for him, for you." He moved quickly to pull aside the stove, revealing a trap door beneath. Evelyn looked down. Dirt steps, old blankets, stacked jars, enough space to wait, to breathe. "To survive." "I'll only go if you promise me one thing," she said, voice trembling. Thomas looked up. "You come back, no matter what." Their eyes locked. In that moment, with death pressing in from the trees and morning bleeding through, the windows, something unspoken passed between them, something old and aching and real. He nodded. "I promise." She climbed down, wrapping Caleb in silence. The door shut above her, the stove rolled back in place. Thomas turned, breath steady now. He moved to the front door, loaded the rifle with a practiced hand, and pulled his coat tighter. Then he waited. Outside, the sun touched the snow, and with it came shadows, and somewhere among them, Jonah Cray was coming. The morning didn't break. It shattered. A single crack rang out through the trees. Sharp, loud, final. A rifle shot, echoing, like thunder in a coffin. Thomas dropped behind the window frame just in time. The wood splintered where his head had been a second earlier. They'd fired first. He smirked. "Cowards," he muttered, rolling to the side and grabbing the extra shells he'd lined up the night before. The cabin was built like a fortress, thick, logs, narrow windows, strong beams. But even wood had its limits against enough lead. He stayed low, crawling to the side slit where he had cut a spy hole 2 winters ago. Through it he saw them, 4 men creeping from different angles. Jonah, Cray's boys, paid guns with whiskey for blood and fire for eyes. One of them, tall, long coat, red scarf, moved in too fast. Thomas didn't hesitate. Bang! The man jerked backward, hands clutching his chest as he crumpled like a marionette with cut strings. 3. Left. Another one screamed, "He's picking us off! We go together!" Mistake. Thomas switched position, quiet as breath. The moment they regrouped near the tool shed, he fired twice, quick, deliberate. One dropped, one scrambled. Then came silence. But Thomas didn't relax. He knew that quiet. It wasn't retreat. It was regrouping. Jonah Cray hadn't shown himself yet. That meant one thing. This was a distraction. He ran back to the stove, yanked it aside, and pulled open the trapdoor. Evelyn's eyes met his, wide and alert. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "The baby's still asleep." He handed her the spare revolver. "Take it. If anything happens to me—" "Don't," she cut him off. "Don't say that." Their hands touched as she took the gun. A long, electric pause. "I need you alive," she whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded and closed the hatch again. Outside, the last shooter was circling back. Thomas spotted him near the outhouse, trying to get elevation. He crouched, crawled along the back wall, and crept toward the side exit. He slipped out into the snow, boots silent, breath slow, each step calculated. The shooter didn't hear him. Thomas raised his rifle. "Drop it," he barked. The man spun, too slow. Crack. Another body hit the ground. Thomas exhaled. His heartbeat was a drum inside his ribs. 4 down. But still, no Jonah. Then, a voice. Cold. Calm. Too familiar. "You always were good at hiding, Tom." Thomas turned slowly. There he was, Jonah Cray, riding in from the East Trail, alone on a dark bay horse, dressed in a duster slick with frost. A rifle across his saddle and a revolver on his hip. "I didn't come to fight your war," Thomas called. "You brought it to me." Jonah dismounted slowly. "I came for what's mine." Thomas's jaw clenched. "She's not yours." Jonah chuckled, low and cruel. "She was promised, bought and paid for. Not by her." Jonah took a step forward. "You gonna die for her?" Thomas didn't blink. "If that's what it takes." A standoff. Cold wind. Breaths visible, trigger fingers twitching. And from inside the cabin, Evelyn stood with her baby in one arm, and the revolver in her other hand pointed at the door. She was done being hidden, and she wasn't letting this man take her again. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the gray sky, unaware they were falling onto the most dangerous moment this ranch had ever seen. Thomas stood still, boots planted in the frost-covered dirt, his rifle leveled at Jonah Cray, just 20 paces ahead. Every inch of his body was coiled like a whip ready to strike. Jonah's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you took her in like some savior," he said, voice calm as ice. "But you and I both know men like us don't get to wear white hats." Thomas didn't respond. He watched, listened, calculated. "She was promised to me," Jonah continued, hand resting near his revolver. "The father made a deal. You're messing with something bigger than just a woman." Thomas's voice was low and steady. "You're not owed a person. That's not a deal. That's slavery." Jonah's jaw twitched. Inside the cabin, Evelyn moved to the door, her revolver shaking slightly in her hand. She wasn't a killer, but she was a mother now, and she was tired of running. Thomas heard the creak of the floorboards and knew she was near. "Stay inside," he shouted without turning, but she didn't. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, barefoot in the snow, her eyes locked on Jonah. "He's right," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "You bought a name, not a woman." Jonah stared at her, expression unreadable. "You were kind once," she said, "when I first arrived, before you started drinking, before your fists did the talking." Jonah blinked. "You think I don't regret it?" "You regret losing control," she snapped. "Not what you did." Thomas raised his rifle again. "You've got 10 seconds to get back on that horse and ride out." Jonah chuckled, bitter and broken. "You think this ends with me riding off?" You don't know the men I work for. They don't just vanish. I don't care who you work for, Thomas said. This ends here. Another beat. Then, fast as lightning, Jonah drew his gun. Evelyn screamed, but Thomas was faster. Bang. The bullet struck Jonah square in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He collapsed into the snow, groaning, his pistol slipping from his hand. Evelyn ran to Thomas, dropping the revolver and gripping his arm. Jonah coughed, blood trickling from his mouth. You don't know what's coming, he wheezed. Thomas knelt beside him, pulled the revolver away, and looked him in the eye. I know enough. I know I'm not letting you drag her back into hell. Jonah's breath rattled. They'll come for you. Let them, Thomas said. Evelyn knelt beside them, her hand trembling as she reached into her shawl and placed something in Jonah's palm. It was a photo, her wedding photo from years ago. You were a different man then, she whispered. Jonah looked at it, and for the first time, his eyes welled with something that resembled remorse. He didn't speak again. Thomas rose and looked to the hills. No more shadows moved. For now, it was over, but something told him the real storm hadn't even begun. The snow hadn't let up. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled gently, casting soft orange light across Evelyn's face as she sat beside it, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of cedar and smoke. Thomas was across the room, his rifle leaning beside the door. He hadn't said much since Jonah had been taken away in the wagon, alive but barely. Evelyn watched the flame dance. You didn't kill him, she finally said, voice fragile as the frost on the window. You could have, but you didn't. Thomas looked over, his face shadowed. Killing's easy, he said. Living with what follows. That's the hard part. Silence stretched between them. Not the awkward kind. The kind that builds bridges quietly. He'll come back, she said. Or someone worse will. Thomas nodded. Likely. Evelyn looked down at her hands. So what now? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window and stared out at the snowy hills like he was searching for something beyond them. Then, without turning, he said, You stay. As long as you want. I don't lock doors and I don't make rules. Her throat tightened. I don't want to be someone you just rescue. You're not, he said, turning to face her. You're someone I noticed. Someone I chose. His words struck her harder than any bullet she'd ever imagined. She pulled, the blanket tighter. I was promised to a man who thought I was property, then taken in by one who doesn't even ask my name. He stepped closer, slow and steady. I figured you'd tell me when it mattered. Evelyn looked up, eyes shining. It's Clara. Thomas blinked. That doesn't sound like a lie. It isn't. Not this time. A small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Then I guess it's nice to meet you, Clara. For the first time in months, she laughed. A light sound, like glass wind chimes swaying in spring wind. Thomas stoked the fire, then poured two, mugs of coffee, black and bitter but warm. You don't talk much, she said, accepting the mug. I've had more regrets than stories, he replied. And yet, she said, here I am, sitting across from a man who shoots to wound, not kill, who makes room for strangers, who offers fire instead of fear. He didn't answer, just sipped his coffee. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, something quieter stirred, a trust that hadn't been earned with words but with action. And as the fire burned low, Clara leaned her head against the wall, eyes growing heavy. I think, she whispered, I could stay here. Thomas looked at her long and quiet, then murmured, I think I'd like that. But beyond the hills, where the snow turned black in the night's shadow, riders moved silently under the moon. Something darker was on its way. The next morning, The world outside the cabin was buried deeper than before. Snowdrifts pressed against the windows as if nature itself was trying to hide them from whatever might be coming. Clara sat by the stove, hands cradling a bowl of porridge Thomas had made, thick with oats, sweetened faintly with pine syrup. She hadn't eaten something warm and safe in what felt like years. Thomas poured water into the kettle. He moved slow, like a man who had learned to ration not just food, but words and trust too. "Storm's getting worse," he muttered. Glancing toward the window, she followed his gaze. "You think we'll be snowed in?" He shrugged. "Wouldn't be the worst thing." There was a pause, then her soft voice. "Thomas, do you ever think about what life could have been?" He didn't look at her. All the damn time. Silence settled between them, the kind that's full of unspoken grief. She placed the bowl down gently. "You ever been in love?" He chuckled once, but it wasn't warm. "Once. A long time ago." She had a voice like a meadowlark and a laugh that could stop bar fights cold. "What happened?" "I left," he said simply. Clara blinked. "Why?" "Because I didn't think I deserved her. Men like me, we carry too much blood on our boots." Her voice lowered. "You don't scare me, Thomas." "I should," he said, finally meeting her eyes. She held his gaze. "But you don't. Not one bit." He turned back to the kettle, steam now whispering from the spout. "Maybe. That's what scares me." They shared a quiet smile, the kind that doesn't need promises, just presence. Outside, a branch cracked under the weight of snow. Thomas's body tensed immediately. He stepped to the door, lifted the rifle from its resting place. Clara stood, heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" He didn't answer, then he opened the door slowly. A gust of cold wind blew in, and with it, a set of tracks, fresh ones, boot prints, leading up to the edge of the cabin. Then, vanishing. Thomas crouched, studying the snow. "Just one man," he muttered. Heavy, limping, came right up, here and stood still. Clara looked around nervously. "Why would he—" He turned toward her, face suddenly pale. "To watch." They both looked at the forest line in the distance, where the trees stood still as graves. Then Thomas said quietly, "He was here. Not to attack. Just to remind me." "Of what?" she whispered. Thomas stepped back into the cabin, shutting, the door softly behind him. "That my past ain't buried," he said. "It's just waiting for the right snow to melt." Clara sat beside the cradle, staring at the sleeping baby boy. Not hers, not his. And yet somehow both of theirs. Now outside, snow still fell, softer than before, but the cold had turned cruel. It was the kind that crept under your bones and reminded you just how alone you were. Thomas hadn't spoken much since spotting those boot prints outside. He'd been carving wood quietly at the table, not out of hobby, but habit. The kind of habit men picked up when trying to distract themselves from old ghosts. Clara finally broke the silence. "Who was he?" Thomas didn't look up. "The one outside? Don't know yet, but I know the kind. Carries death in his shadow and patience in his step." She swallowed hard. "Is it someone from your... before?" His hands paused. The knife, in his fingers, trembled slightly. Barely noticeable, but not to her. "I fought for the Confederacy," he said at last. "Wasn't proud of it even back then. Didn't fight for slavery or land. Just followed orders. Lost a piece of myself. Every mile I marched," Clara's breath caught. "I saw towns burn," he continued. "Watched boys become corpses in under a minute. I've held dying men whose names I never knew." He looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time she saw the scar under his beard. A twisted slash from jaw to throat, half hidden, half ignored. "Is that why you never sent a photograph with your letter?" she asked softly. Thomas nodded. "Didn't want to lie. Didn't want to scare you off either. Figured if a woman showed up despite not seeing my face, Maybe she was looking for something beyond a pretty man. Clara looked away. Guilt prickled beneath her skin like cold rain. "When I saw you on that porch," she whispered, "I dropped the baby out of shock, not because of your face, but because it felt like I was walking into a story already written in blood." Thomas stood slowly, walked to the hearth. "You were right," he said. "You stepped into a story full of broken pages." She got up too, stood behind him. "Then let's write new ones." He turned, met her eyes. "Even if it ends with another man knocking on my door with a loaded gun?" Clara didn't blink. "Especially then." He studied her like a man measuring a miracle. And then, 3 sharp knocks at the door. Knock, 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 not wind. Not accident. Deliberate. Thomas reached for his rifle. "Stay behind me." But Clara didn't move. The baby stirred. The fire hissed. And from outside came a voice. "Thomas Blackwood," it drawled. "You took something that belonged to me." The cabin held its breath. Thomas gripped the rifle with the ease of an old killer, stepping quietly toward the door. His boots didn't creak, not even once. Clara stood behind him, one hand on the baby's cradle, the other clenched, at her side like she might throw fists at the devil himself if it came to it. "Who are you?" Thomas asked through the thick pinewood door. The voice on the other side was smooth, cold, the kind that made the hairs on your neck stand straight. "You know who I am," the man said. "You just hoped I died in that ditch you left me in." Thomas's jaw tightened. Elijah. The name tasted like rust in his mouth. Clara's brow furrowed. "Who's Elijah?" "Used to be my friend," Thomas said low. "Before the war. Before we rode with the wrong men." The voice outside chuckled. "Before you took what was promised to me." There was a long silence. Then the man said slowly, "She was mine, Thomas, you knew it." Thomas lowered his voice. "She chose me, Elijah. She didn't want your ring or your rage." Elijah's voice turned venomous. "She's dead now, buried under 2 feet of prairie dirt. You still think she chose right?" The wind howled through the cracks in the shutters. Clara whispered, "He's talking about the woman you left behind?" Thomas nodded once. "Her name was Anna. She was Elijah's cousin. We both loved her, but I won her hand." He turned to Clara, and something in his eyes flickered. "Elijah blamed me for her death." "Did you cause it?" Thomas looked away. "No, but I didn't stop it either." The door creaked under a sudden shove. Snow puffed in through the edges. "You gonna let me in, Thomas?" Elijah called. "Or am I gonna have to carve my way through?" Thomas cocked the rifle. "You ain't taking another thing from me." Clara stepped forward. "Wait," he turned. "Clara," but she was already moving, crossing the cabin, picking up the iron poker from the hearth. "If this is your past," she said, "then I'm part of it now." A second knock. Louder. Thomas whispered, "He's not here alone. Elijah don't do anything without eyes in the trees." Clara's breath caught. "You mean?" "They're circling us," Thomas said, "waiting for nightfall." Outside, Elijah's voice rang again. "I want what's owed, Thomas. I want blood, or I want the girl." Clara's heart pounded. "He means me." "No," Thomas said, stepping in front of her. "He don't get anything." Another knock. This one made the door rattle. Then silence. Then... "Midnight," Elijah said. "That's when I'm coming through. Either she walks out, or I burn the whole place down." And just like that, the footsteps crunched away into snow. The clock ticked louder than it ever had. Each second dragged its boots across the wooden floor of the cabin. Clara sat by the fire, the poker still in her hand, her knuckles white from holding it too tight for too long. Thomas stood near the window watching the trees. "They're still out there," he said. "Waiting. I saw the glint off a rifle scope in the ridge." Clara didn't flinch. "You really think he'll kill us?" Thomas turned. "No. A beat. I know he will." Clara looked at him then, really looked. Not like a man who'd ordered a bride out of loneliness, but like someone who'd carried a ghost on his back for years. His hands trembled as he set down the rifle to light a single oil lamp. "Anna," she said. "What happened to her?" Thomas's voice was low. "We were fleeing after a bank job went bad. Elijah went crazy, shot a sheriff who never drew. I grabbed Anna, tried to get her out of there, but he followed us, said I stole her life and his future." Clara's breath caught. "Did you love her?" "I did," he said. "But not like this," she blinked. "Like what?" Thomas stepped closer. "Not like I'm learning to love you." Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. Instead, she whispered, "Then trust me. Let me help." He paused, then reached under the table, pried up a loose floorboard. Clara leaned forward. Inside the dark cavity sat a folded piece of paper, worn at the corners. "What is it?" Thomas hesitated. "A letter. From Anna. I never opened it. She gave it to me the night before she died. I couldn't face what she might have said." Clara took it gently, unfolded it. Her lips moved as she read. Then her hands began to shake. "What?" Thomas asked. Clara handed him the letter. It read, "Thomas, if you're reading this, then I'm likely gone. Don't blame Elijah. He's a fool. But you carry the weight of everyone. You always did. Don't let it crush you. And if by some chance you find someone else, don't run from her like you did from your past. Tell her. Let her in. You deserve peace, Tom. You really do." Thomas stared at the paper. Something broke behind his eyes. Then, bang, a rifle shot. The cabin wall splintered above Clara's shoulder. They hit the floor. "Sniper," Thomas hissed. "He's testing the cabin, seeing if we're armed." Clara crawled to the baby's crib, shielding it with her body. Another shot. Closer. Thomas grabbed his rifle. "I'm ending this." "No," Clara cried. "You go out there. You die." He turned to her. "Then what do we do?" She looked at the letter, then back at him, a fire rising in her voice. "We don't give him what he wants. Not the blood. Not the fear. We make him come to us. We make it a trap." Thomas looked at her like he hadn't seen her before. "You'd risk it? For me?" "No," she whispered. "For us." Outside, the wind howled, and from the dark, Elijah's voice returned. "Tick-tock, lover boy. It's almost midnight." The wind outside had changed. It wasn't just cold now. It was hunting cold, the kind that sneaks through the cracks in your walls and your resolve. Inside the cabin, Clara held the baby tightly, against her chest, rocking slowly, whispering, "Shh, Mama's got you." Thomas paced near the hearth, every step slow, controlled, like a wolf trying not to bleed before the final fight. Midnight was minutes away, and Elijah was still out there. "I can't risk you," Thomas muttered. Clara stood, fiercer than he'd ever seen her. "You risk me every time you try to do this alone." Thomas looked at her, the storm in his chest finally crashing. "If he gets in here—" "He won't," she said. Her eyes narrowed toward the shadows in the corner of the room. "We make the trap now. You said he'd come through the west door?" Thomas nodded. "Always takes the flank. Thinks he's smarter than anyone." "Good," Clara whispered. "Let him think that." She placed the baby inside a wooden drawer lined with blankets, sliding it carefully beneath the bed. Then she grabbed a lantern, smashed it against the floor near the west wall, and lined the base with dry cloth. "When he kicks that door in," she said, "you shoot. I'll light the fire." Thomas hesitated. "You sure you've done this before?" "No," she smiled. "But I've survived worse than a broken man with a vendetta." The room went silent again. Then, crunch, bootsteps on frost. Closer, closer. Thomas readied his rifle. The fire cracked. Clara held the match in trembling fingers. Suddenly, a voice outside the door, low, venomous. "You ready, brother? Gonna watch your little doll bleed out before I send you to hell." Thomas gritted his teeth. But then, a surprise. Clara shouted back, "She's already dead, Elijah, you're late." A pause. And then, crash. The door flew open. A shotgun blast tore through the frame. Thomas fired once. Missed. Elijah rolled in like a snake, laughing, firing blind toward the sound. Clara lit the cloth. Flames roared up the wall. Elijah turned, startled by the fire. That second was all Thomas needed. Crack. The rifle shot echoed like thunder. Elijah dropped. Smoke filled the cabin. The west wall burned hot. Thomas rushed to pull Clara away from the fire, coughing, eyes watering. They fell together near the bed, chest to chest. "Is he?" she gasped. Thomas looked back through the smoke. Gone. Only the fire remained. The next morning, the town marshal arrived to find a burned-out cabin, a blackened body outside, and two soot-covered souls cradling a child between them on the frozen porch steps. Thomas handed the marshal the letter from Anna. The man read it, nodded slowly. Guess justice came its own way. Clara stood, hair wild, eyes tired but calm. "We're not looking for trouble, Marshal." He tipped his hat. "Trouble's over, ma'am. You folks just start over." And just like that, they did. The fire took half the cabin, but the heart of it, the part that mattered, survived. 3 days passed. Clara sat on the edge of the rebuilt porch, the baby in her arms, watching the morning sun rise like it was made just for them. The snow had melted around the edges of the ranch, steam curling from black soil. Thomas stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee, limping from the wound Elijah left behind, but still standing, still breathing. Clara looked up and smiled. "You didn't sleep again." "I did," he lied. She took the cup. "You lie like a soldier," he smirked. "Used to be one." A silence passed, but it wasn't heavy now. It was warm, the kind of silence 2 people share when they've been through hell together, and came out loving the way the other limps. Clara rocked the baby gently. "She still doesn't have a name," Thomas said softly. Clara looked down. "Neither did I. Not really." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I came here as Clara May," she said. "But that name belonged to a girl running from something. Not to who I am now." She looked at him, really looked. "I want her to have a name that means something." Thomas sat beside her. "Then let's name her together." They sat in thought for a moment, the wind gentle, birds beginning to return to the trees. Then Clara whispered, "Hope." Thomas nodded. "Hope." "And her last name?" she asked, half afraid. He looked her in the eyes. "Same as yours if you'll take it." Her breath caught. "Thomas," she said, eyes welling, "I didn't come here looking for a husband." "I know," he said, "and I didn't send for a bride. I sent for someone who might. Remind me I was still alive." She took his hand. "You didn't remind me," she whispered. "You saved me." He pulled her close, and under the wide, western sky, broken people held on to each other, not to forget their pasts, but to promise a different kind of future. One not built on fear, but on hope.